like him. The more and more you analyze the impact from Tim Walz, the more and more you analyze the process of the selection of Tim Walz, the more and more you examine the reaction to Tim Walz, the more and more clear it becomes. It is that simple. People like him. In a time when 50% approval for a politician is a landslide of support, when the very few most earnest and most honest politicos are still just tolerated, when we have had a decade of one of the most disliked humans on the planet hating everything and everybody, the idea that the Democrats are running not one, but two likable candidates is staggeringly important and simple and novel. I mean, when you get literally 100 words into the founding document of this nation, the Declaration of Independence, you hit the unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Happiness. Tim Walz is happy. Tim Walz is happy to be living here. Happy to be fighting to help other people become happy, and now to join Kamala Harris, who is also happy and who smiles like a person. Trump isn't happy. At every moment of what should be rapturous success, Trump is degrading somebody else. He's embittered. He's angry. He's the victim. He's been shortchanged. He's threatening revenge. And he hasn't even digested the new polls, and yes, they continue to be all Kamala, and I will review them in depth in a moment. But to finish up this point, Trump has dug up from the garbage dumps of this nation every slob who wants to force his will on you. The latest of them is this robot, Vance. Every slob who believes that for him to succeed, somebody else must fall. Preferably 100 somebody else's must fall. They're evil, they're greedy, they're malignant, but at their core, they fulfill H.L. Mencken's priceless definition of Puritanism. The haunting fear that someone, somewhere, may be happy. And it's not a one-way street. In response to them, we have become angry and self-righteous, and I put myself at the top of that list. And then Vice President Harris steps out of the background, smiling and laughing and underscoring a point I made 2 weeks ago. When the hell have you ever seen Trump actually laugh? And now here's Tim Walz, and he's been the vice presidential candidate for 8 hours, and he's not just telling dad jokes, he's telling some dirty dad jokes.
Make no mistake, violent crime was up under Donald Trump. That's not even counting the crimes he committed. J.D. Vance literally wrote the foreword for the architect of the Project 2025 agenda. Like all regular people I grew up with in the heartland, J.D. studied at Yale, had his career funded by Silicon Valley billionaires, and then wrote a bestseller trashing that community. Come on! That's not what middle America is. And I gotta tell you, I can't wait to debate the guy. That is, if he's willing to get off the couch and show up. So, you see what I did there?
Don't underestimate that seemingly throwaway line at the end there. See what I did there. This is below-the-belt humor used as a political kill shot, but honed over his decades in classrooms, is that little softening agent that allows him to take the meanest joke and reduce its trauma to mitigate how you couch it. See what I did there? By the way, the couch thing will never go away. Viral yesterday, a photo of J.D. Vance in a podcast appearance, seated either on a love seat of some sort, a divan maybe, legs spread as far apart as they can go, man-spreading, the pros call it, as he sits on a large, wide chair or a small, narrow couch. The couch is J.D. Vance's dead bear cub. And all credit to the vice president. Kamala Harris barely knew Tim Walz last week, and by Monday, he had vaulted over her favorites, who supposedly carried guarantees of guaranteeing states like Pennsylvania or Arizona, and barely into day two, is there any question that as good as Senator Kelly and Governor Shapiro might be as leaders or politicians, is there a chance they could do for this campaign what Tim Walz can do? Do you want to hear what Tim Walz says next? Do you, like him? I don't like quoting Politico, but they got it exactly right. Kamala Harris loved Tim Walz's governing record in Minnesota. His biography and record of winning tough races resonated with her. And most of all, she just really liked him. I also don't like videos of the phone call. They are universally cringe, except this one. The words beautiful, enthusiasm, enjoyed, and joy are all used in this phone call, and not, ironically, and not by the goddamned candidate about himself. These two people get it. America is so worn out by and so done with unhappy weirdos.
Would you be my running mate and let's get this thing on the road?
I would be honored, Madam Vice President.
The joy that you're bringing back to the country, the enthusiasm that's out there, it'll be a privilege to take this with you across the country.
Well, let me tell you, I have just the utmost respect for you. I have really enjoyed our work together.
And yes, that was her second phone call to him. It turns out he did not pick up the first time because she didn't have caller ID. Frankly, Tim Walz is America. Pointing at Trump and saying, what the heck is wrong with this weirdo? Thank goodness the Trump people took this well. It is instructed that the Trump cult, having spent literally 5 years focused on nothing but Joe Biden, has, 3 weeks after his departure, still not come up with one attack line against Kamala Harris. They were convinced she was going to pick Josh Shapiro, so they had attacks ready on him. And now they have nothing but Nikki Haley accusing the Democrats of anti-Semitism because they didn't pick him when Trump admitted to owning a book of Hitler's speeches, which he kept on a nightstand in his bedroom, and Trump is openly anti-Semitic, and she bowed to him after insisting she never would. They threw everything at the wall, at the Tim Walz, am I right? I can hear him making that joke. Maybe I'm learning something. Not only did nothing stick to that wall or walls, but there is no evidence that any of it even hit the walls. Stephen Miller insists Walz is going to turn the Midwest into Mogadishu, which would be nice and racist if any of Trump's supporters knew where the hell Mogadishu was, or if they were certain it was not some kind of delicious foreign food. Kevin McCarthy says Walz was known as the Bernie Sanders of the House. And it was like, wait, is that an insult? People like Bernie Sanders. People who don't like the policies of Bernie Sanders like Bernie Sanders. They look at him and they see Larry David. You want to insult Tim Walz, Kevin McCarthy? You tell them people said Tim Walz was known as the Kevin McCarthy of the House. That's an insult. They sent J.D. Vance to Philadelphia to proactively attack Walz even before Kamala introduces him, and they have Vance stand in front of a huge banner reading Kamala Chaos, which isn't a bad line, a C- maybe, especially not for Republicans, especially not for Republicans in disarray. but they can't snap out of their one template. So in the little mandatory tableau they insist on, there have to be people behind Vance. It has to look like there's a crowd of people who agree with him, even if you have to pay them. And there are no seats, so everybody is standing behind Vance. So they're standing behind him, and because they're not all 3 feet tall, you can't see the word chaos. So all you get is J.D. Vance giving an impossibly monotonous speech, another one, under a big banner that reads Kamala. And you're thinking, man, now this is a surprise endorsement. And of course, Vance is only out there because Trump is taking the week off. And as the Democrats go from political honeymoon number 1 through the Harris-Walz political honeymoon number 2 on their way to political honeymoon number 3, the one that is the convention, why would the Republican presidential candidate bother to appear in public? Let the freak in the eyeliner do it all while Trump stays home and tweets. Trump's campaign is suddenly bleeding to death, and he's getting laughs scored off him by the guy who would have been about the 500th likeliest vice presidential candidate in the gambling houses 2 weeks ago. While, by the way, all the networks carry his speech live and carry Harris's speech live and carry Josh Shapiro's speech live. And somebody at CNN who can read the ratings is thinking, say, maybe we should show all of their speeches live from here on in, huh? Instead of 3 more hours of Van Jones. Maybe Trump in the bunker is, in fact, the best for the cult, because on top of everything else that has gone wrong for the Republicans, Trump has turned into a moron. Yesterday, he posted nothing less than very bad fanfic, wherein Joe Biden storms into the Democratic convention to take back his nomination. And I'm sitting there reading it thinking, could you make the projection about what you would do, Trump? Could you make it slightly difficult to deduce from what you've written? After apparently deciding to power through on what is also hands down the worst attempt to tag an opponent with an insulting nickname, the Biden fanfic was the highlight of the Trump social media day. Face it, the nicknames are perhaps Trump's only true political skill, other than the fire hose of lies that makes checking each lie impossible. And he has decided, after years of success at political nicknames, that putting a B, the letter B, in the middle of Kamala Harris's name is the greatest idea he's ever had. Kamala with a B. Kamabla. I have spent more time than I care to admit over the course of 2 full days now trying to figure out what the hell it means, what the hell it's supposed to mean, how he is hearing it sound in the big cobweb-filled attic that is his head. Kamabla? 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 I see the word able in there, Donnie. Sorry. Punt on this one. Or let JD have a try at giving her a nickname, because in the world of American politics, 2024, jokes matter. This is your fault. And you were winning all this time on this topic, but at 3 o'clock, the high schoolers got out of class, and now they're out there with you kicking your ass. Sometimes it happens like that in life. Unbeaten, unchallenged, always at worst competitive, a perennial threat, and then one day they go right off the cliff, never to be heard from again. One day you are the best. The next day, it's all gone. The muse has packed and moved out to, like, Australia. Let me swing off into a baseball analogy for a moment before I run the polls. Crazy, I know, I never do a baseball analogy. The 1983 Philadelphia Phillies had 4 future Hall of Famers in their lineup, plus Pete Rose. A 6th player won a Most Valuable Player award. Another one won the Cy Young Award for Best Pitcher. 4 other players won Gold Glove awards. Of the remaining 14 guys on their roster, 11 were past or future All-Stars. The Phillies won 20 of their last 25 games in the 1983 season, but in the playoffs, they faced the Dodgers, to whom they had lost 11 of 12 games during the season. It didn't matter. They beat the Dodgers in 4 games. They rolled into the World Series as an unstoppable juggernaut. They beat Baltimore and young Cal Ripken in Game 1 at Baltimore, and many observers thought the 1983 Phillies might sweep the World Series. And then the sun rose, and they awoke on the morning of Wednesday, October 12th, 1983, and the juggernaut overnight had become a bunch of washed-up old Trumps. Phillies led Game 2 1-0 in the 4th inning. They blew that lead. They only scored 6 more runs in the entire rest of the series. They benched Pete Rose, and there was a huge controversy. They lost the World Series in 5 games. They got rid of Pete Rose. They got rid of 2 of the Hall of Famers, most of the All-Stars, the award winners. They next won the World Series 25 years later. And a little-known baseball fact, it was all because they tried calling her Kamala. They didn't, but how great would it be if they had? Marist polls for PBS. Harris 51, Trump 48. Harris by 3. Previous poll, Trump by 1. Marist for PBS. Who do you trust more on abortion? Harris 56-41. Who do you trust more on preserving democracy? Harris 53-46. Who do you trust more on the economy? Trump, but by only 3. Who do you trust more on immigration? Well, this is the killer, right? Trump's real chance to survive the Harris tsunami. Yes, the poll says they trust Trump more on immigration only by 6. That is as startling a poll number as I have seen in 2 years. Swing state polls, Redfield, Wilton. The polling was done Saturday. New Mexico is Harris by 7. Minnesota is Harris by 5. That may rise. Arizona is Harris by 1. In this poll, it had been Trump by 3. Pennsylvania is Trump by 2. In this poll, it had been Trump by 4. Michigan is Trump by 1. In this poll, it had been Trump by 3. Georgia is Trump by 2. In this poll, it had been Trump by 5. Nevada is tied at 40. Wisconsin is tied at 43. Same poll. Harris approval. Up by 1 point in Arizona and Georgia. Up by 3 points in North Carolina. Up by 5 in Wisconsin. All of these numbers before Tim Walz. Happily for Trump, he can turn to his in-house geniuses like senior campaign advisor Chris LaCivita and spokesperson Caroline with a K Levitt. LaCivita, July 24th. Reliable sources confirm Kamala to pick Governor Shapiro from Pennsylvania. Chris LaCivita from August 5th, 5:30 p.m. Breaking news, according to my sources, Kamala Harris is not picking Josh Shapiro, Pennsylvania. Caroline Levitt, yesterday, statement on Kamala's selection of radical leftist Tim Walz. Doesn't mention Joe Manchin supporting Tim Walz for vice president. From proposing his own carbon-free agenda to suggesting stricter emission standards for gas-powered cars and embracing policies to allow convicted felons to vote. Wait. What was the part in the middle there about embracing policies to allow convicted felons to vote? Trump is opposed to this? Trump is a convicted felon. I think he knows. Clearly, his spokesperson does not. Don't worry, all is fine as Trump headquarters. From now on, we're just going to mention Caroline Levitt's name, but put a B in the middle of it. So she's Caroline Levitt. How could this possibly get any better? How could a day have gone better for the Democrats than it did yesterday? How? Well, Monday at 12:30. I'm sorry, I'm laughing in advance. Monday at 12:34 p.m. Eastern, retweeting the Reuters bulletin that Josh Shapiro and Tim Walz were the vice presidential finalists for Kamala Harris. One pundit retweeted this, adding, "It's going to be Shapiro, people." Signed, Chris Cillizza. Oh, that's it, Trump. That's it right there. That's it. I shouldn't say it because this is it. This will put you right back in the race. Hire Chris Cillizza. Have him workshop the Kamala nickname. Maybe Cambabla. Kablabla. Blah, 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 blah. Something like that. Give Chris a few years. He'll come up with it. It's going to be Shapiro, people. Chris Cillizza is the Chris Cillizza of Chris Cilizzas. Also of interest here, somebody touches Congressman Derek Van Orden, brushes past him in a line going into a hotel. He wants them charged with assaulting a member of Congress because Derek Van Orden is nuts. And not only does Axios.com fire 10% of its staff, but the boss makes the departed read about it in a memo that is written in that disgusting, impossible to understand Axios ease. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Ahead of us on this edition of Countdown, I was supposed to anchor NBC's cable coverage of the Summer Olympics in 2000 from Sydney, Australia. But I kind of quit the job in 1998, so that didn't happen. Then I was supposed to anchor NBC's cable coverage of the Summer Olympics in 2004 from Athens in Greece. But I told them no, I'd rather stay in New Jersey and try to grow this new news show on MSNBC called Countdown. And there are still former sports executives at NBC who are now retired who continually think I am insane, even though that decision turned out the way it did. I was also supposed to cover the Summer Olympics in 1980 in Moscow, but then the U.S. pulled out of those games in a political thing, so that was not my fault. But I am proud to tell you that I have not watched 1 minute, not one highlight from the 2024 Summer Olympics in France. I mean, you could tell me Kamala Harris won the Olympic skeet shooting on ice gold medal yesterday, and I'd say, sure, yeah, she was great. I was watching. I'm beginning to think I may not like the Olympics. If this is true, my not liking the Olympics dates back to 1980 in my experience as part of a 2.5-man team that covered the entire Winter Olympics at Lake Placid, New York. Just the 2.5 of us. The half a guy was management. He was in the office most of the time. It was rewarding. It was challenging. It was snowy. It was cold. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I have done everything since then to make sure that it was literally just once in a lifetime, especially after the other 1.5 guys, my boss and my boss's boss, got me drunk one night and then sent me to cover the skiing at sunrise, and I almost did not survive it. Next, in things I promised not to tell. First, there are still more new idiots to talk about, the daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's worst persons in the world. From the top of a mountain. The bronze, worse, co-founder Jim Vandehei of Axios.com, the news organization, which fired 50 people yesterday, 50, and did it not just by memo, but by Axios-style memo. Axios pretty much sucks. They overextended. They paid management too much. They spent most of their time complimenting themselves. They relied on a cutesy style they called smart brevity, in which they would state the basic facts of a story for about a paragraph or so and then begin to spin it with a subheadline indented that read, "Why it matters." This was part of the memo from Jim Vandehei. Difficult changes. We're making some difficult changes to adapt fast to a rapidly changing media landscape. Why it matters. We're eliminating about 50 positions to get ahead of tectonic shifts, and they used the format of the publication that Axios puts out twice a day their newsletters to inform the people writing the newsletters and reporting for the newsletters that they were being fired from the company. It's like, I don't know, getting a pink slip inside a custom-made Ford Motor Company, I don't know, cover for your inside windshield. Unbelievable. Why it matters. Why it matters, you might be unemployed. And there's an indented paragraph later on that reads, with a little dot, if your job is being eliminated, you will receive an accompanying email in the next few minutes with information about your severance package and a calendar invite for a meeting with a leader from your team and a member of the people team. We wanted to tell each of you in person first, but the mechanics of that proved infeasible. In other words, Jim Vandehei didn't want to go to the office in the morning. Why it matters. You may not have a job anymore. Speaking of which, the runner-up, worser, Bloomberg News. Sure, its White House reporter Jennifer Jacobs was Trump's favorite, and sure, she once tried to make a thing out of the vice president saying the, as in the point here. And she did a lot of stupid stuff and a lot of bad coverage and a lot of absolutely the worst elements of Washington inside the Beltway. We just talk to each other and have no idea that there are human beings affected by this kind of insider access stuff. Sure, she did that. On the other hand, she was apparently, reportedly, fired because Bloomberg blew the embargo on the rescue mission, the trade of hostages that got the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich back. They reported it too early. She was the principal writer on the story, so naturally she got fired. As somebody wrote, I haven't heard the last time that a reporter actually hit send on their own story, unless it's a one-person website. Even at Axios, they don't get to say why it matters. An editor gets to say that. And so, the Bloomberg editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite, disciplined staffers for jumping the gun on the dramatic deal, this according to New York Magazine, and he didn't seem to fire any editors, or if he did, they were not as prominent in the organization as this Jennifer Jacobs, who was fired because the story she wrote was put out before the embargo was lifted. There may be other details to this. Perhaps she told her bosses that the embargo had already expired, or that she had authorization from her sources, or that everybody there at the White House team for Bloomberg said it was okay. But we don't know any of that. Right now, it just looks like Bloomberg fired the reporter because the editors did something wrong. Once again, the story of journalism. But our winner, Congressman Derek Van Orden of Wisconsin. We have talked about him too many times for me to go into a review about him and the fact that it looks like he has PTSD and has never done anything about it. He was about 25 years in the military, and the wear and tear seems to have gotten to him. Plus, he's a Republican from Wisconsin, so he's an asshole. However, Rep. Van Orden was in line for the morning event at the Republican convention in Milwaukee and happened to find himself trying to get into the Pfister Hotel. That's right, they've kept the name Pfister for a century. The Pfister Hotel. I'll meet you at the Pfister. Also, the Pfister is supposedly haunted by people who were really bothered by the name Pfister, I suspect, or people sentenced to eternity in the Pfister Hotel. Where were you sentenced? Well, I went to hell for 1,000 years. Where did you go? Oh, it's much worse than hell. I went to the Pfister Hotel. P-F-I-S-T-E-R. Pfister. Anyway, I'm getting away from the point here. He was in line, Van Orden was, and if he's going to purgatory, he's definitely going to the Pfister. Van Orden was in line along with the members of the protest group Code Pink, including one Noor Jagama, a 24-year-old woman who was in line, apparently just in front of Van Orden in this security line to get in during the Republican National Convention, along with other members of Code Pink. The congressman seemed to touch her gently to get her to move when the line towards the security box began to move. She said, "We're moving," or he said, "We're moving," and she moved, and she grumbled about it, and she said something wise, and then she walked back in front of him, which is where she had been before the line was moving, and he then says, "Ma'am, you'd better watch it," and begins to claim that she has cut in front of him. She was already in front of him. And Van Orden then accused her of political violence. You just assaulted a member of Congress. Van Orden is about a foot taller than this woman. He said he'd be filing a police report. He told policemen on the scene that he would do that. And as usual, the real victim here is always Derek Van Orden. A helpful cop then says to another officer, she just shoved a senator. There was no shove, and Van Orden is not a senator. He's barely a congressman. Van Orden is seen saying, this blank ain't happening anymore. Then the police body cam video, which reporters were told did not exist, suddenly existed again, and it was released. And on it, you see it the way I've just described it to you. There's a woman standing in front of a congressman. A line starts to move. She doesn't move fast enough for him. He tells her to move. She moves and mouths off to him. She moves back in front of him where she was, and he accuses her of, well, to use the parlance of the time, an attempted assassination. Well, almost. Then there is a conversation between Van Orden and one of the cops. The questions one of the cops asks Van Orden, they're going to ask is, did you feel pain? Van Orden replies, I have really bad hips. Okay, so pain, the officer asks again. Then Van Orden pauses and says, yes, my hip. My hip hurts. I mean, it hurts already. Did she exacerbate it? I don't know, but a hip check is a hip check. Van Orden was a Navy SEAL. He was deployed 5 times, but oddly, go look up the 5 deployments online. The only one you'll find named that he boasts about is going to Bosnia, where I guess he suffered a hangnail. Now, I don't know if he received the Congressional Medal of Honor, but I'm sure he thinks he did. Congressman Derek, I have been mortally wounded. My hip hurts. Oh, no, it's an act of political terrorism. This tiny woman, 5'0", just knocked me to the ground. My legs have fallen off. Oh, no. Oh, I'm bleeding. She actually murdered me. Van Orden, today's worst person in, the world. Soft as a grate. The alarm goes off. It is pitch black in my room at the Swiss Acres Motel. It is Valentine's Day, and I am still drunk. Keith knew he was in trouble. But I was also 21 years old, and in fact, my 21st birthday had only been 18 days earlier, so somehow I survived. Showered, dressed, packed, and I mean I packed 2 cassette tape recorders, 4 sets of batteries, an audio processing machine that weighed like 14 pounds, the 9-volt batteries it took, I think it was a dozen of them, a telephone, a backup telephone, 12 assorted patch cords, 2 loose-leaf notebooks, about 8 pens, 2 microphones, 2 extra pair of socks. Then I got dressed, 2 full sets of thermal underwear, shirts, sweaters, snow pants, snow shoes, because it was 11 degrees below zero that morning. I got something quick to eat at the commissary, and I made it out somehow to the line for the bus from the Lake Placid Olympic Center to the Lake Placid Transportation Center to Lake Placid's own Whiteface Mountain, then on to the snow track, the open-penned mountain tractor that went up the side of Whiteface Mountain and took me to the finish line of the 1980 Olympic men's downhill ski final. Still drunk. That is how a reporter covered the Olympics nearly 43 years ago. You drank. You woke up, you went, you stood near the finish line, and when the skiers completed their runs, you hiked or wobbled over to them, and you took out your microphone or your pen and you interviewed them like 2 minutes after they had finished hurtling towards you down the hill. You could see almost nothing of the race from there. There were no TV monitors. Basically, your only clue was the sound of the crowd that would give you about 30 seconds worth of warning that the skier was coming over the near horizon, and you should be prepared to flee just in case he or she wiped out. Also, you were on top of a mountain at the dead point of winter, and whereas it might have been a balmy 11 degrees below zero in the comfort of the Swiss Acres Motel, with the wind chill at the base of the mountain, it was 48 below zero, and there had already been 4 inches of new snow since the sun came up, which is where the still drunk part came in handy. My bosses at my first job, the 1,000-station radio network called United Press International Audio, had decided the night before to teach me how to drink while on assignment. My bosses were the bureau manager for that part of UPI, the late Stan Sabick, who had hired me, and Sam Rosen, the sports director of the network, who not only somehow survived being my first boss, but today, just 43 years later, is still working as the television voice of the New York Rangers hockey team and is in the Hockey Hall of Fame. So I guess my reputation as a tough employee is wildly overrated, or at least Sam thinks so. Sam and Stan kept me drinking at the motel until 2 a.m., knowing full well that I had to get on the 6 a.m. bus to go cover the men's downhill because it was the two of them who had assigned me to go cover the men's downhill. And bluntly, I was surprisingly pleased with myself that freezing morning because I had indeed learned how to drink while on assignment. I had somehow found the phone jack for the UPI phone buried under all the new snow, which of course was buried under all the old snow, attached the phone to it, gotten a dial tone, called the office, checked the alligator clips with which I would feed the tape, and all was well. Until I went to put a cassette tape into the cassette recorder. I didn't have one. Fat lot of good 2 cassette tape machines gonna do you without a cassette to stick in one of them. I looked forlornly around the base of Whiteface Mountain. 1,200 feet above sea level as we were, there was a surprisingly nice chalet and a decent restaurant, but there were no Radio Shacks or other electronics stores. There was, however, one other radio guy, Jack Briggs, from the Associated Press Radio Network, the nominal arch-rival to our own UPI Audio. I knew Jack a little. He was a nice guy. I went and explained my plight, making sure to blame my bosses for my predicament. "Oh, man," he said, his breath turning into first steam and then ice cubes. "I'm so sorry, but I can't give you a cassette. I'm sorry, you're UPI and I'm AP." Oh, how I laughed. That was a great line to say to a rookie reporter still drunk, thanks to the initiation rituals of his own bosses, the possessor of 1 great buzz but 0 audio cassettes. Jack Briggs could tell I thought he was kidding. That's when he said, I'm not kidding. Look, if my boss Shelby Whitfield ever found out, he'd fire me." I suddenly wasn't drunk anymore. Not at all. My boss will fire me. Briggs was adamant. I can't run the risk of Shelby finding out. I have to confess, I shouted, "How in the hell is he going to find out, Jack?" I think subconsciously I was hoping to create an avalanche, which would have been a better solution than the one I was faced with. I said to him, "There's you, and there's me, and we're on top of a goddamn mountain, and Shelby Whitfield, your boss, is in Washington, D.C., and he's a drunk, and he's probably more drunk than I am, and he'd probably thank you for helping me to drink more." Briggs would not budge. I told him I would pay him. I told him I would give him the cassette back after I fed my boss the interviews over the phone so there'd be no evidence and he wouldn't even have to do any interviews. No good. "I'm sorry, and I know you're going to tell this story about me for a while." As he walked away from me, I shouted after him, "Forever!" Turned out there was no Radio Shack and no camaraderie, but there was a West Coast newspaper reporter atop the mountain who heard some of this conversation. I guess I yelled a little loudly at Mr. Briggs. Some guy standing next to a St. Bernard told me to quiet down. He mentioned something else about the avalanches, or maybe I dreamed that part. I don't know. Anyway, the West Coast newspaper guy said he had a micro cassette machine and he would loan it to me and I could give it back to him at the media center that day or the next one. But I had to do him a favor because there was this really cute reporter in our UPI bureau and he really wanted to be introduced to her. And I said, I can promise you nothing but a handshake. And he understood. And that's how I did not get fired. But of course, a story like this has punchlines. And this one has two of them. The first is 2 years and a couple of months later, Shelby Whitfield asked me to lunch. He had left the Associated Press to run the sports department at the ABC radio network back when that was not only a thing, but a big thing. We went to a terrific New York City Chinese restaurant near ABC called Shun Li. And Shelby Whitfield interviewed me for a job when that kind of job paid $80,000 a year and my very nice studio apartment in a very nice part of town cost less than $500 a month. Later, in an interesting twist, I found out the jobs didn't exist. I was mentioning the interview in a press box somewhere, I think Madison Square Garden, and there was another kid reporter named Howie Rose. And Howie is still working. He does the New York Mets games on the radio. And Howie said, wait, they interviewed me for that job last year. It's just an excuse for that damn Whitfield to go drink his lunch on ABC's tab. Anyway, before we started the interview for the job I did not know did not exist at ABC, I told Shelby Whitfield the Whiteface Mountain, can I borrow a cassette, Jack Briggs story, and Shelby's exact reply was, how in the hell was I going to find out? There was you and there was him and you were on top of a goddamn mountain and I was in Washington. Only he didn't say goddamn. That Briggs, he added, always trying to suck up to me. I gotta tell you something. I actually once promised I wouldn't tell you if we ever met this. When the Olympics were over and he came back to the office, he told me what happened. He expected me to be happy or give him a bonus or something. And I called him a little snitch. Only Shelby didn't say snitch. Just a word that rhymed with it. The other punchline is from 1992. And remember, this happened at the 1980 Olympics. I go to work at ESPN and come in a little early to launch their radio network, a story I've told here before. And there, I find a friend of mine since my radio days who I had not seen in a year or so, and he says, hey, last month I was at an NBA game in Washington. I ran into Jack Briggs. He heard you were going to ESPN. He asked me if you were still telling that story about the time you got stuck on Whiteface Mountain without a cassette, and he was the only other reporter there, and he wouldn't give you a spare, and I told him you were. And I smiled and I replied, I hope you remembered to use the word forever. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, the musical directors of our little countdown podcast here, have arranged, produced, and performed most of the music you've heard throughout. Mr. Chanel on orchestration and keyboards, Mr. Ray on guitars, bass, and drums. And their work was produced by TKO Brothers, which is the two of them and me. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. My announcer today was my friend John Dean. Everything else was pretty much my fault. And yes, part of me is still in line somewhere waiting for a van at Lake Placid, New York in February 1980. Let's count down for this the 91st day until the 2024 presidential election and the 1,308th day since convicted felon Donald J. Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Use the September 18th sentencing hearing. Use the mental health system. You've got it, President Biden. Use presidential immunity to stop Trump from doing it again while we still can. And also, anti-Semitic, anti-immigration, lunatic Republicans, please stop shooting at Trump. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. If you've suffered along with me and my voice today, I'll just mention here that I'm living in the middle of a construction site, and there is every possible debris in the air, and that's causing my voice a lot of harm. So if there's none tomorrow, blame the construction site. I'll do my best. Bulletins as the news requires. Until the next one, whenever it is, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.